Bonsoir. Oh là, c'est fort.
Good evening. Our guests are going to join us in a sec. I'll take a moment to introduce them to you in a while, but I'll start with a brief introduction after this wonderful film. Now, if one person should have made it into the movie, it's someone whose story does not date back to the 20s or 30s, as we saw in the documentary film, but it's someone whose story came up during the Paris Olympics. Algerian boxer Iman Khalif, who eliminated her opponent after 30 seconds in the last 16. Angela Carini, her opponent, said it wasn't fair. Then Giorgia Meloni posted on X saying that the fight was unfair and that athletes with male characteristics should be banned from taking part in sports. And then there were tweets from J.K. Rowling, who we now know is transphobic, Elon Musk, who called out a trans athlete who should not compete with women. Iman Khalif is not a trans athlete. She probably has a testosterone level that's higher than most women. And that's the reason why one of the World Boxing Federation, IBA, excluded her from its competition because of this high level of testosterone, although it did not detail neither the analytic method nor the results. So we don't know how they came to this conclusion. The IOC, the International Olympic Committee, allowed her to compete. The IBA president, who's close to Putin, accused the IOC of following woke ideology. So, as you heard, President Trump banned trans athletes from competing, despite the fact that these trans athletes are 10 out of 100,000. In France, the National Rally in 2023 came up with a draft law to the same effect, and one of the athletes with us is named in this particular act. In this particular case, Halba Diouf. So it's important for us to give the floor to athletes very concretely so that they can tell us about their trajectory and they can tell us what they think about their situation. I'll introduce them briefly and then we'll be hearing them. Halba, good evening. You're 23, you're a student. You run the 200 meters, you're a trans athlete, and you were excluded from regional and national competitions by the French Track and Field Federation, as well as the International Track and Field Federation, World Athletics. We'll come back to your struggle as well as the obstacles that you have to overcome. Maho, Bah-Villemagne, you are 30. You have founded Box Massilia, which is an association. You're the first transgender boxer to have officially competed with men in France. It was a few months ago. Over there, Madeleine Pape, good evening. You're a former 800-meter runner. You were a high-level athlete. You participated in the Beijing Olympics. You work at the University of Lausanne and are a recognized scholar. Next to Halba, Bengt Kayser, you are a physician and honorary professor at the Sports Institute of the Lausanne University. Would one of you have something to say about the film, very briefly? Are there things that struck you by ways of introduction to this discussion? Halba, Maho? Yes, there's one scene that struck me particularly when they talk about the first 800 meters at the Athens Olympics and the focus not on the defeat, but on the athlete who collapses and not on the victory of the first athlete. She did not get a celebration. She did not get a podium. The entire conversation focused on whether women could compete or not. Yes, and they couldn't for a long, long time. Yes, absolutely. And it took 32 years for them to go back to competition, which strikes me very much. Madeleine, you're a sports historian. What do you have to say? When we prepared the conversation, you said that as soon as women started competing, we saw this in the film, when they started appearing in stadia, their presence was challenged.
Well, we discussed. I'll do my responses in English for the Anglophones in the room. But actually, for me, it was incredible to see the footage. I haven't seen the footage of that particular race before, even though it's really part of women's sport folklore. You know, that this famous race in 1928 was the one and only 800-meter race for women at the Olympic Games until 1960, and I think it's really what for me is really striking is just to actually see the women themselves who've been impacted by the ways that we have sought to invisibilize or even just remove opportunities to compete. And that's the same also with athletes like Annette Nagiza, the 800-meter runner from Uganda. I think it's just really important that we get beyond abstract debates and we actually understand how individuals have been so significantly impacted by the ways that we police gender in sport.
Bengt, rapidement, et puis Halba aussi.
Bengt and Halba, very quickly, what struck you?
Humans are storytellers. We love stories, and I found that this was a great story. There were beautiful, moving stories being told. What struck me were two things. The opening scene with the initially just 2 lanes, and the remark that there is one separation, and they zoom out and then suddenly discover, hey, wait, there's not just 2 lanes, there's many more. I found it very well symbolizing the topic that's being discussed. And then the end, I think, yes, Julie, this discussion is poking into the foundations of the myth of the level playing field and equal opportunities that is being sold by the Olympic movement and other sports institutions, which is starting to crack because it's really clear that, wait a minute, there is a problem here. There's something wrong. I also found it very strong.
On développera après. Halba?
We'll come back to this, Alba. I was struck by the situation of Amanda. It's unfair. She won her race. She wasn't recognized because she's a trans woman. She's not considered as a woman as such. It's really sad that World Athletics and the French Track and Field Federation put obstacles on the way of trans women who deserve to be considered as women and as full-fledged athletes. They're athletes. They're not trans. They're athletes. And that's what I find shocking. Well, let's come back to your story, Halba. And if you could please speak closer to the mic when you give your answers, it'll be easier for everybody to hear. Now, in 2022, after you transitioned, whereas you were one of the best sprinters in France, you were excluded from the lists of the elite championship by the French Track and Field Federation. And then in 2023 came the decision from World Athletics not to allow trans athletes, both men and women, who have gone through male puberty to compete. And this decision banned you from international competitions, including the Paris Olympic Games, despite the fact that you were really close to qualifying. It was a possibility for you. It was something that you could consider, right? So you were in the French media. We heard you a lot at that time, and it's quite interesting because when you spoke about your struggle, some people at the Track and Field Federation thought that transitioning may be an opportunity to get to better results. This is extremely violent, but it's really at the heart of people's fears and anxiety. In all of your interviews, you said afterwards that you don't transition just out of opportunism. You do so that your gender corresponds to who you are. So could you tell us about this? At that time, you said, I'm a woman, and you will have to get used to this, you sports federations and sports institutions.
Well, the first thing is that I'm a woman. You have to deal with it. Coming back on the decision of World Athletics in 2023, the decision was by Sébastien Coe was to ban women who have gone through male puberty beyond the Tanner stage 2, so beyond 12 years of age. So that's a very pernicious decision because that means that transgender woman to be accepted, she would have not to have gone through any stage of puberty. So, and it's impossible to transition before the age of 12. What parents would let their child transition medically at 12 years old? That would be a very heavy decision to make, and it's very complicated actually to do so. I am currently suing the World Athletic and the French Track and Field Federation because currently I can only compete at a departmental level, even though I'm the best French athlete on 200 meters. I train four to five times a week, and I do a lot of sacrifices to reach that level. And still, I can only compete at the very lower levels.
Enfin, comment ça s'appelle? Le André Giraud.
Coming back to André Giraud, the president of the French Athletics Federation, he was transphobic, talking about me in French media. He said that transition to be better positioned, but you don't transition to win a race. You transition to feel good about yourself. I transitioned because I didn't feel good in my body. I didn't recognize myself in the male gender, and now I feel good about who I am and didn't transition to steal anybody's place. There are many obstacles to women's racing, and transgender women are certainly not one.
Vous avez dit dans différentes interviews que, en fait,
in many interviews, Maho, you said that when you're 7, you understood that maybe not that you would have to transition, but you'd already understood that something wasn't the same as your friends or schoolmates. And when they asked you what was your dream, you answered, I want to be a mom. Well, it sounds silly, but when I was 7, I was at school, was talking to a very good friend of mine during recess, and we were talking about our dreams and everything we wanted to do when we grew up. And I told her I wanted to be a mother, I wanted to have a child, I wanted to get married. And my friend told me, but you can't, you're a boy. And that's only when I understood I was a boy. And in all that journey to become a high-level athlete, did you have any hesitations regarding your transition? Did you think that if you were to transition, things would be very difficult? I will ask you the same question, Maho, later. Well, it's true that there are many obstacles. When I joined my track and field club, women's club as Halba, I had already given up on the idea of competing because that was too much for me, both transitioning and being an athlete. It seemed incompatible, but I can tell you today that it is very much compatible. It's complicated because you need to take estrogens, testosterone blockers, that leads to changes in your body, physical, mental changes, and it's very difficult to go through. So I hesitated quite a bit, not to transition, but to stop playing sports, because in my mind, doing both was impossible. And it's as I went along with my transition that I understood that it could work out. Of course, I needed to exert a lot more effort to reach a certain level. One more question, and we'll give the floor to Maho and the rest of the speakers. I talked about this draft law put forth by the Rassemblement National, the far right, who says that that targets you by name, and that says that you are a product of woke culture. Usually in draft bills, they talk about, they quote Victor Hugo or historical reference, and you are quoted by name. You're a citizen of the country. What does it tell us on the times we're going through? Keeping in mind that you're just a sportswoman who only wants to play sport and live her life freely. It's not easy to suddenly be in the limelight because of a far-right party. You're just being thrown out to the wolves. Well, along with my lawyers, we are suing the Rassemblement National for transphobia because I'm gendered as a male in the text, and today I'm a woman. Administratively and personally, I know who I am. I know I'm a woman. I just find their attempt ridiculous. It's just a stupidity. It's a lack of knowledge of what trans identity is, and I can't even explain it because I'm not in their minds. But well, I wasn't trying to ask you to explain it. It's true that it is quite chilling. Maho, you have been a French champion, and then you transition. You're competing in the 54 kilos, below 54 kilos. Maho, you've always known that your gender was not the one that was assigned to you at birth. What about your transition? You delayed it because you were afraid not to be able to box, and boxing's your life? Absolutely. It's quite funny because I discovered boxing after I was assaulted. I already knew I was trans, but I was convinced I would not be. I was convinced I wouldn't be able to do my coming out. I would just stay in a closet for my entire life, and I lived my life as a lesbian. And one day, in the city of Nice in France, I was assaulted by a man. He assaulted both me and my ex, and he said horrible things about lesbians that I'm not going to repeat here. But he said things that were so violent that I got angry and I pushed him back. I pushed him back and we fought. That was the first time I ever fought in the street against a cis man, and me still having a woman's body. And then that's when I realized that I didn't know how to defend myself, and I did things that didn't make any sense with my body. And that's when my obsession for self-defense came up. I wanted to defend myself, to fight for myself, for my ex, and so on. And then we called the police. Long story short, they told us, well, look at how your girlfriend is dressed. And I was so mad. I got so mad that I decided to learn boxing. And boxing was so liberating to me. It liberated me physically. It made me feel more self-confident with regard to my trans identity, the space I could take up in the streets. It was fantastic. And as I became more masculine and happier, it did become more complicated in competition because I wasn't taking any testosterone, but I was already very androgynous. I didn't have a mustache, but I was very androgynous. And very often, when I arrived at competitions, they thought I was fighting in the men's category, but not at all. So it started to become complicated, and sport is very gendered, women with women and men with men, and that started to feel uncomfortable because when you're fighting and the coaches say, "Come on, come on, girls, come on, girls, come on, ladies," and you're not a lady, it's starting to feel very uncomfortable. So my last match, that was in June 2023. I was fighting with women, and I did a lot of research on trans athletes. I'm sure, like Halba did. In the US, you had to go through full transition to be accepted, and boxing was so important to me. Now, looking back, I realize how much violence I inflicted upon myself. So I thought, no, I'm not going to stop boxing, and I even denied my own identity for quite a while. And there came a point where it became more and more visible. There were more and more competitors who were asking me if I took testosterone or not. It wasn't true back then, but I started being afraid of it. And as a person of color, I am very often checked by the police, so it made things even more complicated. So I looked like a dangerous black man, and then when they check my ID, they realize that I'm a woman. So it created very complex dynamics. Once I've even had a policeman hit on me, and it really shocked me. And it completely changed my relationship to everything. I realized that I couldn't take it anymore, and I decided that I would give up boxing and do my own thing, be myself. I thought I would just box for the fun of it.
Maho, we spoke about the Track and Field Federation's behavior in the case of Halba. What was the behavior of the Boxing Federation? The Boxing Federation has no issue with you boxing at this stage, but it's still problematic. Can you tell us a little bit about it? Well, the thing is, I fought. I really didn't think I'd manage. But I was lucky enough to have a contact who had a contact who knew someone who knew someone. And the funny thing is that they accepted my struggle for transphobic reasons. They didn't really know it, but that's what happened. The reason why I can fight in the male category, because I'm a former woman, as they put it, so I'm the weaker sex. I want to fight in the stronger gender category. It's my problem. It's me who wants it, and therefore it's not a problem for them. And they told me that for trans women, it's different because it would mean that cis women would have to fight trans women without wanting it. So it's kind of ironic when you think of it. You even said that we're in a situation that they don't know how to deal with. It's always a first for them. Yes, absolutely. And you never know what their reaction is going to be. Yes, and that bothers me a little bit because that's exactly what they told me. I was the first of my kind. They'd never been confronted with this. And 4 years ago, I met a trans woman who fights. She had 2 fights just like me, and she comes from English boxing. I come from French boxing. But I'm not quite sure why they don't harmonize their rules and regulations, because obviously they deal with these situations differently depending on the federation. Thank you, Maho. Madeleine, clear at the back. You've had 2 lives. You were currently a sociologist, but you were an athlete before. Around 2009, you were running the 800 meters, and it's right around that time that Kayser Semenya, who is a South African athlete and has since become a 3-time world champion, she started running on the track. Her situation was mentioned in the documentary film. At the time, she was under a lot of suspicion. Her situation was very controversial. There have been trials that are lasting up to this day against the federations, against major federations in some countries. I wanted to ask you the following question, and I've been wanting to for a long time. In the audience, there may be people, and Bengt will tell us about what the science says about these cases, but some people may think right from the get-go that trans women are at an advantage. It's not the case of Kayser Semenya, who's not a trans woman. But you're an athlete at the time. You see Kayser Semenya start competing. It's the other athletes complain about her. What have you understood since 2009 that people now should understand? What do we need, each and every single one of us, understand to avoid these reactionary, gut reactions?
But if I speak from my own experience, so actually I had the opportunity to race alongside Kayser Semenya on the blue track in Berlin that was showing in the film, and so that was in 2009 for the World Championships, and it was the World Championships where the controversy really erupted around her right to compete. So I saw that unfold on the ground as a very naive athlete. What's interesting, I think, is that at the time when I first saw Kayser Semenya, when I knew already that she was a very strong athlete, when I was very disappointed to be in the same heat as her, but also other athletes who were very strong, I didn't actually question her right to compete. It was only once World Athletics took the lead in publicly stating that they were going to investigate Kayser Semenya the night before the finals, not even letting her run the final before they called her performance into question. And I think she was 18 years old or something at the time, very, very young. It was only once the institutions around us endorsed that diagnosis of the situation that it even became available to me as a way to think about her place in the women's category. I would never have questioned it otherwise, because there were already, of course, we always have certain athletes that are more dominant than others. Over the years, I think what probably has alarmed me the most is that, I think we often lack curiosity about this topic. We think we know the answer before we've actually taken the time to read widely or hear different opinions and think about our own biases, our own assumptions. There's, I think, often just a lot of sort of closed minds, unfortunately, around this topic, when the opportunity is really to open our minds and think critically about our own experiences in relation to gender and sport, and to have the opportunity to meet people that we might have otherwise never met. You know, I've had the opportunity to meet not just Annette Nagisa, but also other intersex women, other trans women as well, who've been impacted by eligibility rules, and to actually hear firsthand from someone how they've been impacted. And sometimes these are people competing or just wanting to be involved in sport at the local level, who've nevertheless been impacted by the ways that we model exclusion at the elite level. It really, I think, is very important to actually get out of our comfort zone and meet new people.
J'ai une question sur si on doit résumer, puisque
If you look at the situation at the global scale, but also at the local scale, at the level of international federations as well as national federations, we talked about the behavior of federations, and sometimes you get the feeling, looking at the situation, that it's fragmented, arbitrary, unintelligible, that specific rules are not always there, and when there are specific rules, as is the case with Halba, they're unethical and sometimes completely arbitrary or reactionary. There are some sports in which trans athletes are not challenged. In other sports, more capitalistic sports, where these issues loom large. What is the situation from your point of view? Are we at the beginning of the road, or are we in 2025? Sometimes it seems nonsensical.
Sport as a mirror of social norms, but I think it's actually really important to recognise that sport shapes social norms. It's a very active institution in the way that in how we form our own ideas about gender, and so that's why actually a lot of anti-trans organisations have specifically targeted sport. It's not an accident. They know that people have very strong emotional investments in the way that we have built narratives about binary female-male difference in sport, that there is, somehow a bright line in between women on one side and men on the other, which is just an artifact of how we've organised sport, from a very young age. And that's, for me, the really troubling part is that all women are shortchanged by this narrative. The problem, and I think that, Halba mentioned this too, it's not trans women that are the problem undermining women's experiences in sport. It's the fact that sport remains male-dominated, that women are not valued to the same degree as men. They're not paid the same, they don't get the same opportunities. They experience harassment, violence, abuse, a lot of online harassment in sport, which is obviously also the experience of boxer in Paris, Khalif in Paris. So we need to work together, and I think that was a really great message at the very beginning of this movie or this documentary as well, was that we shouldn't be in competition. We've got to be in solidarity and really reveal the fact that gender inequality in sport continues to be what undermines equity and fairness for everybody.
Je vais donner la parole à Bernd Kayser, mais je te voyais réagir, Halba.
I was going to give the floor to Ben Kayser, but I saw you nodding, Halba. Well, what I found shocking is that trans women have always been allowed to compete, but they had to keep their testosterone rate under 10 nanomole, and then they went down to 5 nanomoles. The president of World Athletics could have found a compromise, maybe keep their rate 2.5 or 0.5. Banning trans women who have gone through male puberty, that's banning 100% of trans women, just telling us not to play sport. It's discriminating. It's so violent. I don't understand. And the IOC published the International Olympics Committee published a legal framework in 2022, guidelines on trans identity that are supposed to help sports organizations to deal with the issue. And they've opened the door, and it's the federations that do not want to follow suit. Trans women represent 1% of the population. And I'm the only trans women who's track and field athlete. Who are we excluding here? Well, if you allow me to intervene, the problem comes from the federations. Federations are not united at all, and each federation decides for themselves. And the track and field federation does their own thing. The rugby federation does their own thing. The English boxing, French boxing federation, gymnastics federation, and the IOC is trying to push us for harmonization. But as everyone does what they want to do in their own corner, we can't harmonize things. And what I find shocking is that even when you fully transition, my T rate is 0.1. I did everything I could to become a woman, and I'm still being excluded. With my lawyer, we have a 300-page case against the IOC, and that proves that I'm not advantaged compared to other women. Yet it blocks at national level, international level, and I don't understand. But as we're talking about sports federations, according to you, what is not working there? Where is the obstacle in those sports institutions? As we've seen with Halba's testimony, that nothing here is very much rational, is it?
There is a myth that is being maintained with lots of violence. Even if Halba were able to reduce her testosterone levels to 0, which you shouldn't do because it's bad for your health, don't do it. But even if you would get there and you would win a competition, people will not give you the merit of winning that competition because of what you went through. Now, how do we put that into perspective? Now, here's a very, very important one. A famous Swedish physiologist once quipped, "You want to be an Olympic champion? You better choose your parents well." Okay, what does that mean? Hey guys, we're all humans, that's what we share, but we're all different. We're born with different genetic backgrounds. It's a gift from nature, from your parents. There's no merit in that. If you were lucky enough to be born as Michael Phelps, good for you, and kudos that you were able to exploit this gift of nature in such an incredible way. But there was no merit at the starting point. You were lucky. It is something we should not forget when we try to put these things into perspective. Sports, international competitive sports, is the celebration of differences. There is no level playing field. It doesn't exist. It's a myth. It's a dream that some people like, and why not? The problem is that it's on very loose sand. So when athletes sitting next to me try to fit in this story and they don't fit, the story starts to shake and protest. So I really concur with the conclusion of the movie. It's starting to crack. These athletes, and I thank you for doing what you're doing, you're really probing there where it hurts. And it's really time that the national federations and the Olympic Committee in the first place recognize this loose sand on which the foundations of the Olympic movement are built.
Pour le dire clairement, que nous dit la science
So, concretely, what does science tell us?
développée dans les médias ou par les fédérations elles-mêmes, c'est que
The prejudice that is put forth by the media and federations is that trans women or intersex women have a competitive advantage on cis women.
la science très clairement
What does science tell us?
Très clairement, la science dit que
Well,
beaucoup d'incertitudes. Rappelez-vous,
what science tells us is that there are a lot of uncertainties. You know, science is about not knowing or not knowing very well. My motto is the more I know very little. And that's what us researchers have to come to terms with every day. There are things, though, that are quite clear. In nature and in human nature, that's something that we share with other species. There is male and females. That's a necessary condition for procreation. And in human beings,
XX pour les
it's XX chromosomes for women and XY for men, and many other genes that
ça c'est la donne pour la procréation. Et ensuite,
work on different other things. So that's for procreation. But nature is imperfect, otherwise we wouldn't have evolved, because evolution is based on genetic imperfections. Sometimes you get 3X or 1X and 2Ys, or 1Y, which is a bit weird with the receptors everywhere in the body. And the result is something that's not clearly defined and does not fit within the male-female category. So that's biology. We're starting to understand it. Then there's something else. It's gender. Gender is cultural. Gender is something. It's our way to make sense of biology, but there's a lot more to it. And today, in our discussion, and
il y avait quelques moments
earlier in the film, there were some moments where it was very clear we conflate biology with gender.
quelle est l'identité
Biology with culture. What is your identity? What do you identify as? And there's a world of possibilities there, and it's down to us collectively to talk about it and to make something of it. But let's not confuse it with biology.
Madeleine, there's something that struck me as I was discussing with each and every single one of you while preparing this discussion. There's something that's ironic. We're constantly controlling women's testosterone levels. What about men? Don't we check anything with men? It's absolutely crazy when you come to think of it. There are all sorts of mechanisms in national or international federations to measure more or less transparently, by the way, the levels of testosterone. It's become an obsession. Yes, people even talk about femininity levels.
It doesn't stop with testosterone testing. And I mean, the documentary explained that there is there has been a selective testing protocol in place for sports like track and field, where certain women, if they're deemed suspicious, are singled out for testing. That's been the regime for the last 20 years or so. In fact, World Athletics is now proposing to reintroduce mandatory chromosome testing for the women's category. And they've just undertaken a consultation with, well, we don't know who, but whoever was able to get their hands on the link to submit a response. And this would mean that all women wanting to compete above a certain level, whatever they've defined as elite track and field, would be required to do a chromosome test to prove that they have XX chromosomes. And for any woman who doesn't meet this this test. She would then be subjected to potentially further very invasive testing to verify, for example, genitalia, the extent to which her body is responsive to testosterone, whatever potential transition journey is in her past. So it's very alarming, actually. And the problem is that there are many athletes competing at the elite level before they're even 18 years old. So we're talking about also minors, adolescents potentially being subject to these tests. And the reality is that sports organisations, whether they be at the international level or the national level or the local level, are in no position whatsoever to manage the outcome of these kinds of tests on the individuals who are impacted by them.
Bernd, ce serait une catastrophe, rapidement?
No, I would be totally
Bengt, would it be a catastrophe?
to that, but maybe again to give a little bit of a perspective and to understand how this relates to binary thinking and stuff like that. Another example, a very famous Finnish athlete in cross-country skiing won a long series of medals in world championships and Olympic competitions. And it was found out that he had an incredibly high hematocrit, which is something that relates to the red blood cells in the blood and the capacity to transport oxygen to the muscles, which obviously is very important for an endurance sports as cross-country skiing. And finally, the explanation, he was accused, of course, of doping. And then finally, the explanation was that he had an inborn little error where the receptor for a specific hormone, EPO, you may have heard about that. It was abused by cyclists in the 80s and 90s. He had a bizarre receptor, and the result was as if he were doping with EPO. And since it was inborn, they were kind of uncomfortable with it, but he got away with it. He got some problems with it, but in the end, he was able to keep his medals. It's very interesting because it shows that a lucky strike for some genetic thing, some extraordinary thing, can lead to big differences in sports. And of course, obviously, again, there's no merit in that. So now trying to control for testosterone, it's the beginning of the end, because yeah, what are you looking for? Yeah, you would like to level the playing field. You want to make sure that everybody is at the same beginning, but it doesn't exist. You would have to, I don't know, measure everything, and that is, of course, obviously impossible. So it's I think it's the wrong direction to take. There's something much more important to do, and I'm afraid that the really underlying question is, hey, what are we actually doing in the Olympic Games? What is this circus in a way? Is this something we invented to try and sell the idea of meritocracy? Because that's what I believe is behind it. If you won a gold medal in the Olympics, all the merit is yours. And you're being celebrated as somebody who was able to do something extraordinary. Taking away the fact, and that's a fact, that you started out with a capital that you were then lucky enough to be able to exploit, and of course training very hard, etc. But there was the country they were born in, the parents you had, and the money the federation gave to you, etc., that of course then contributed to your success. And there's not necessarily as much merit in there as we tend to make ourselves believe.
Halba, sur cette discussion, des choses que tu voulais rajouter?
Halba, did you want to add anything before we take questions from the floor? A while ago, we spoke about testosterone. What I didn't say is that the French Track and Field Federation requires me to be tested every 3 weeks for testosterone. And yet, I can't compete beyond the departmental level. So I have to be tested every 3 weeks to make sure that my levels are in check. Same thing for me. I have to regulate my testosterone level to make sure I fit with male competitions. But I'm told that I have to. The bracket is as big as that. I've got to correspond to that. It's not very hard. That's the reason why there are lots of women of color that have issues. It's not very clear. In my case, it's not every 3 weeks, but it's before each and every single fight. I've got to prove that I'm a man before each and every single fight. For other men, no problem. It all started when women started to compete in the 90s. That's when the first femininity tests, chromosome tests started. So we could imagine having a man with testosterone that's lower than yours complaining about you, right? Yes, absolutely. And I tend to say that Mike Tyson probably has more testosterone than his competitors, which was not a problem at the time. And yet, from an ethical point of view, is it normal for Mike Tyson to not have any problem, whereas Imen Khalif, who hardly hit her competitor, had all these problems for one KO, once in a lifetime, once in a career. So why is it not a problem for men to have very high levels of testosterone when it is for women?
Before we move on to the Q&A, I wanted to ask you both, what message you wanted to convey here, and what are your struggles, what are your dreams? Halba. Well, I'd like to win my case against the French Athletics Federation because it's been going on for 3 years, and I would also like to be able to compete like just any woman. Today, I can't take part in the workshops with the French team. I can't take part in the elite French championships. I would just like to be able to enjoy my passion just like any woman and be recognized as an athlete.
Maho?
Alors moi, oui, j'avais noté 2-3 trucs du film que j'avais trouvé pertinents.
Maho. Well, there are a couple of things that I wrote down from the film.
Si on veut essayer de combattre le fascisme au maximum,
The first thing, according to me, is that if we want to tackle fascism, we need to remain united in our struggles. That means that trans women, non-binary women, BIPOCs, all women, all people who are faced with struggles, we need to remain united because they're trying to divide us, and we need to remain united to stay strong. That's my first message.
parce que je suis un boomer sur mon iPhone là.
I'm like a boomer on my iPhone.
J'avais une question pour la fin parce que ça m'a
I also had a question. There is something we saw in a film, the end of the film, the trans athlete, the runner. Her story is actually quite moving. She said that very often it's the public, the audience, that's the most angry at her. That's something we need to think about. Why is it such an issue to watch trans athletes? Because as a boxer, I've been supported by other women boxers. They understood, as sportswomen, they understood what my passion was. Why is the public so hostile? They're not directly concerned with the issue. I think that's something that we need to ask ourselves to try to change mindsets. Parents, of course, all of that comes from education. Madeleine, what would be the answer? Is it sports as entertainment, which is so gendered and so patriarchal? Well, I know that in Australia, it's very often the parents that create problems for trans athletes, young trans athletes. It's not the other kids. Well, absolutely. I was talking about that with friends, and it's down to the federations, to the coaches, to educate others not to use those phrases. You fight like a girl, and so on. So if we want to change the mindset, we need to educate.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you.
Quelques questions. On a une dizaine, quinzaine de minutes.
Thanks to the four of you. We have about 15 minutes for Q&As. I will ask you to briefly introduce yourselves when you ask your question. Also, please stand up so we can see you. And please don't make long statements. Just ask a short question to our guests. Thank you. Thank you to the authorities that are sponsoring this event, and I was wondering how we can change the rules of the game in order to better integrate the various genders and queer people in sports federations. Is it possible to harmonize the way we work? Well, I have a very strong opinion on this. I'm convinced that we need to change the bylaws and the regulations. For example, when it comes to female testosterone rates, in the past, women didn't play sports, but now young girls as young as 8 do play sport, and we know that sports produce testosterone, and the laws have not been reviewed since then. It's a small thing, but it can really change the state of play. There are new bodies, new women. That's it for me. Madeleine?
There's different battle fronts, right? Like one battle is youth sport. And I think for youth sport, we must absolutely prioritize inclusion at all costs. Like that must be, I think it's the low-hanging fruit. Like it must be possible for us to ensure that at least kids, trans kids have the opportunity, and also non-binary kids, to just turn up and play. Like that has to be the priority. And unfortunately, in some countries, even that is not possible. I think at the elite level, this is really a political question. And unfortunately, a lot of sports organisations currently are making decisions based on what will be most politically expedient for their leaders. And they don't have the courage or the will to actually follow a principled process and do what is right for the minority group here, the minority group who already faces extreme stigma, extreme barriers to even participate in and belong in sporting environments. We don't currently have political will on the part of the international sports leaders to do what is, going to be politically a really challenging task, but an absolutely necessary task. I also think that we often say, oh, we need to have more science, if only we had more research. And I think there is some truth to that. Like we definitely have a dearth, we do not have a strong base of research to help just reassure people actually about what's possible in this space. But I also think there are many people who don't want to see more research, who already have made up their minds about what science says. So we shouldn't fool ourselves into thinking that this is some logical decision-making process or something that's going to be informed by better science. It's really about, it's a political process, and I think that we've got to just really bring humanity to the center of the process and make sure the voices of the people who are severely impacted by these eligibility rules, like Halba, are heard.
Bengt, vous voulez dire quelque chose là-dessus? Je voyais acquiescer.
Bengt, do you want to add something?
Science cannot answer irrational questions. There is no way that science can solve something that is not solid to begin with. And honestly, sometimes I dream of being able to zoom out and not only looking back. It was a very nice look back, of course, but I'm very curious also what happens next. my hope would be that we abandon the underlying myth of the Olympic spirit and move to something else. And Madeleine really reminded us of the importance of sport and physical activity in team play with others, and that kids should be given all the opportunity, whatever their color, whatever their ways of relating to others, whatever their sexual preferences, but being part of the collective and being able to play together.
Ce qui était très fort dans ce film, d'ailleurs, c'est ce collectif en permanence qui est ensemble.
Well, that was actually quite striking in a film to see all these people playing sports and enjoying and spending time with each other. Any other question? Thank you. Well, that's quite stressful. Thank you so much for the film. Back then, I had read that T levels depend on the origin of the individual. I was wondering how the testosterone levels were calculated in sport. Is the rate calculated on the basis of white people, which could in turn lead to even more discrimination, or if maybe you knew where it came from? Well, we'll ask that question to our doctor here.
Take home is that we've put much too much on this molecule. It's become a myth in itself. I recommend a very nice book. It's called I think it's the testosterone myth. I don't remember, Madi. What is the name of the book again? Anyway, there's somebody, a very good science journalist, who has written a book about the testosterone and the mythical things around it.
T, an unauthorized biography. Is it
Exactly, T, an unauthorized biography. I really recommend it, that you read it if you're interested in it, because it takes away the foundations of this idea that it all relates to testosterone. That's not true. Of course, testosterone is important. It does something. Yeah, for sure. But let's not forget that women need testosterone to be able to be normal females. Sorry. Here you have made the same mistake. Females need testosterone to be able to procreate and function normally. They need less than men. Men need more testosterone to be able to develop their secondary sexual characteristics and muscular build. Yes. Is now testosterone the answer, the difference between testosterone levels, the answer to being an athlete at a certain level? No, absolutely not. It's a very, very simplistic way of looking at things.
Voilà, point de vue du docteur. Merci. Vous avez une réponse à votre question. Question devant? Ouais.
So that was the physician's answer. A question in the front? Yes, thank you. My name's Orphée. To give you a little bit of context, I'm non-binary. Now, there's a question I think about in relation to sport. We've got gendered categories. It's the same thing with chess. If I'm not mistaken, there are categories, there are women and men's categories. Isn't that it? At international level, there's a mixed category. Well, trans women are excluded in chess? In chess? Yes, absolutely. But it's completely moronic, isn't it? Yes, but that's... They assume that women's brains are not as good as men's brains. Okay, well, if we continue in the same logic, there are other categories where men, women differences are not as great. Archery, shooting, these kinds of sports. There aren't as many differences between men and women. What about elite sports and the abolition of gendered categories? In the end, if you think about the Olympic ideal, it's excellence in physical ability, regardless of whether you were born with two X chromosomes or X and Y chromosomes. So what are the prospects, future prospects for a world of sports with no gender? Maybe we can start with both of you. In the spaces you're in, are there opportunities to transform states of mind, despite the fact that, Halba, you're in the midst of a huge trial? You're probably faced with very powerful institution. Are there opportunities to transform things? Well, I'm not in favor of abolishing categories. There should be a men's, women's category that should be kept. To my mind, it's impossible to abolish them for the time being, but we should include trans women in the women's category, trans men in the men's category. It's more complicated for trans women who don't want to transition biologically speaking, because there may be an advantage. And to me, if I want to run with women, you have to have medical transition, which excludes trans women who do not want to transition medically. But I'm not in favor of abolishing categories. There are two categories, men's, women's, and that's fine with me. That's my point of view.
Non, mais parce que alors, je trouve ça très intéressant.
I find what Halba says very interesting because I totally disagree with this. What I agree with is that at this stage, it's impossible to abolish these two categories. We're not in La La Land. There's a lot of work that needs to be done on this topic. But to me, sports will come to its apex in 100, 200 years when we reach a mixed category in sports. To me, the real solution is to change the way we look at sports performances. Obviously, in sports, performances are important, but sports is important to go beyond yourself, to learn self-discipline. There are a whole slew of skills that you learn through sports when we tend to focus on performance. What I mean to say by this is that if there are trans women who do not want to transition medically, they should simply decide which category they want to compete in. And if they're better, why not? There are people who are talented. Some people are more talented than others. And this brings me back to the example of Mike Tyson. There are lots of people who were unhappy because they never beat Mike Tyson, but that's the way it happened. And we need to change the frame of mind. People want to always do better, and sometimes you just happen upon someone who's better than you, especially, and it always happens, especially in the world of sports.
Est-ce qu'il y a d'autres questions, peut-être?
Are there any other questions from the audience? Maybe one or two? Bengt, did you have something to say? Madeleine, too, very briefly? Yes, if we briefly come back in time, there's the whole inheritance from patriarchy. Do you know that the size of pants worn by beach volley players are defined to be the sexiest and shortest possible? And even in handball, the Norwegian team, the Norwegian women's team, wanted to wear bigger shorts, and they were disqualified because of this. So this is the reality that we're still faced with. It's still very binary, and it's the legacy of the patriarchy that we have to fight.
Opportunities even at the youth level, for example, where it should be surely possible to have much more mixité, much more gender-integrated sport. And yet often it's young girls who don't feel comfortable in a mixed sport environment because the environment remains built around the boys in that space. There's male dominance at the level of coaching, at the level of running of clubs. So we can't even get it right at the, so I guess, I don't know, I would say we've got to start somewhere. And what a great place to start with youth sport, because there's such an opportunity there to start to unpick this insistence on organising sport all the way down in this binary way, which in the end is not necessary for physical or biological reasons, but which serves very clearly a social purpose.
Je vais prendre peut-être une question.
I'll take one more question, maybe, if I'm allowed by the organizers. Maybe one or two questions, if I can.
Je regarde les gardiens du temps.
Alors moi, je m'appelle Laurent.
My name is Laurent. I'm white, I'm 59, and I'm a man, and yet I'm here. I am here with you tonight. Oh. When you're a man or a woman, doesn't biology involve a certain size, certain amount of muscle mass, which means that, okay, there might not be categories in sports. If you take the example of boxing, won't there always be men and women's categories? And for trans people, we could give them the opportunity to choose their category. But the day there are no categories in sport is still yet to come. Well, if I may answer very briefly, what you're saying is very interesting in women and men boxing. I'm rather short, so regardless of the category, I always fight against people who are much taller than I am. I don't know whether that answers your question, but it's always challenging, regardless of the category. What I want you to understand is that, for me, the challenge is the sports in and of itself. If you fight against someone who's tall, you have a hard time reaching him or her, and that's the difficulty of the sports, regardless. Question put without a microphone, the interpreters cannot hear it and therefore cannot interpret it.
I think it's not black and white sport. If you go and watch the Lausanne Marathon in October, and you look at the results, the first woman will rank very highly in the men, actually. But we present the results separately, so it looks as though there were two races, and that women were on one side and men were on the other, when in reality, there was a lot of overlap between the performances of women and men. So I say we put the elite level aside for now. I don't think we know how far this overlap can go, but I know that there is a lot of overlap in the abilities of women and men, cisgender women, cisgender men, non-binary folks in there also add even more complexity. There's a lot of potential to actually bring this complexity to the surface through sport. You know, again, sport shaping social norms and not simply reflecting them.
Bravo. Y a-t-il une ou deux questions pour terminer? Oui.
Another question to conclude our panel.
La personne devant en orange.
Good evening. Thank you. My name is Manon, and I had a question. I found it quite shocking, this story of the woman who has gone through a procedure without her consent. I was wondering if there were cases in history where legal proceedings helped us put an end to those medical procedures. I think it's a violation of dignity and human rights. Are there examples of it being a success, or are there legal collectives that can support people who have gone through those medical interventions? I find them unjustifiable, whatever the context. Who would like to answer? Well, maybe Halba can tell you what are the obstacles to go to court. There are almost no recourse for most athletes. Taking the example of Annette Kayser, which I was fortunate enough to meet, what does she do now? Where can she go to get justice? I can tell you that federations like World Athletics are not making it easier. They are trying to hamper their access to justice. Well, as I said, I've been in legal proceeding for 3 years. I've been through the NOC, in front of the NOC for 3 years, and I've produced studies that prove that transgender women do not have any advantage. And the French Athletics Federation did not communicate the World Athletic study that showed that transgender women wouldn't have any a particular advantage. So to tell you how complicated it is, I am in legal proceedings at the administrative court, at the Court of Arbitration for Sport in Switzerland, so it's still very complicated. You had your hand up for a long time. That will be the last question. Good evening. Thank you for sharing your opinions with us. My question was, how can discussions within the federations take place? How could they involve the people concerned? And how can tackle these issues within society at large? What could society do if sport doesn't just reflect social norms? Well, I think that sort of panels could help, but invite local elected representatives or sports federation. We could share our problems. I think there's only NBA and FIFA that are favorable to trans athletes. Rugby as well. Rugby, but rugby cancelled. Rugby 13s only. Well, we could hold panels with federations, representative from federation, from the administration. I think for me that would be the next step. You know, we talk about the independence of the world of sport, the fact that sport is aside from society at large. Well, I've had the opportunity to work with several international federations and international sports organizations. You need to know that they closely follow what is being said about sports. Unfortunately, they still use X, but I think that if we're loud enough, they will hear us. You know, they don't live in a bubble. They don't live behind a heavy curtain and not hear anything we say. That's not true. We can influence those organizations. And I know that's what the other side is doing. You know, they're writing letters to the presidents of the federation who read those letters. And sometimes they even answer those letters. So we need to get organized and work together to put pressure on them. I fully agree with you, says Maho. Well, they will be watching this video, so we need to tell them that, yeah, we need to get organized. Thank you for taking part of the discussion this evening. Is there one last thing you would like to share with us? No? No regrets? Okay, well, thank you, and thanks to all the members of the public for spending the evening with us.